Hello, Criminal Justice Administration learners. This week, in the week ahead, we begin a new unit, Unit 4, in which we will review the roles, functions, and administration of corrections organizations. Corrections organizations, as you know, are essentially made up of jails at the more local level, prisons at the state and federal level, and also community corrections programs such as community supervision, probation, and parole. These functions also have unique characteristics when it comes to administration and unique issues that need to be dealt with. Please be aware that this module, the first module for corrections administration, is a 2-chapter module. And in this chapters 10 and 11, we will look at both of these chapters during this module and consider both the overall organization and issues associated with corrections administration and the personnel roles and functions. In Chapter 10, which is the opening chapter on corrections administration, we can look at a couple of issues. One is that the corrections population, in those incarcerated and for convicted crimes, these offenders are actually in decline. The number of inmates has been going down for the past 10 years, but it is going down from an incredibly high level, a very high level of incarceration that was reached during the period when drug-related crimes were given very long sentences and resulted in an extreme amount of incarceration and for many people for long periods of time. There has been a move away from incarceration for drug-related crimes and a move to change some of the drug laws so that there are other alternatives to addressing the drug problem, both the drug crime problem and the drug addiction problem. But we are still at the early stages of moving away from a crime control model to a model that is more based on public health. Also, this chapter considers some unique types of corrections institutions. One of them is the supermax prison. Supermax prisons generally exist at the federal level. They are used to incarcerate the most violent criminals and criminals who have repeatedly attempted to escape from corrections institutions. These are jails which have very severe restrictions on activities of inmates and very severe restrictions that are almost to the akin to solitary confinement on a almost ongoing basis. There are many outcomes, many problems associated with the use of supermax prisons, which are discussed in the book, not the least of which are serious mental health problems that result from this type of severe confinement. And you will find that discussed in some detail in the first chapter on corrections administration. This chapter also looks at some of the constitutional rights and legal rights that inmates have while they are incarcerated. While we sometimes think of them as losing all of their rights, this is not entirely true, and there has been a rising number of rights that have been given either as a result of legislation, but mostly as a result of court decisions which have attempted to some degree to protect inmates from undue harm while they are incarcerated. These kinds of remedies and legal protections involve remedies under the Fourth Amendment, the First Amendment, the Eighth Amendment, and the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. There also are issues related to the civil rights of institutionalized and incarcerated persons, which are a significant concern, and there is a great deal of litigation that goes on in an attempt to protect prisoners from excessive force within or excessive restrictions when they're within in corrections agencies. We have to remember that when we use the word corrections, we really are talking about the fact that there are really two purposes to corrections. One is the first, to confine and ensure public safety, but the second is the meaning of the word corrections, to seek a means for rehabilitating those who are incarcerated so that they can return to the community and return to productive lives. So with these twin goals, there are sometimes conflicts in the way that they are carried out, and the extreme to which sometimes the more crime control model applies to the way corrections is carried out. And on the other hand, when the more rehabilitative oriented model is applied, it also has its drawbacks in terms of possible issues of giving what some people see as more rights to inmates than they feel those who have been convicted of crimes should have. So there's a tension. There's a significant tension. Also, there was during the expanded period when inmates' rights were being fought for in the courts, there began to be many, many lawsuits which were perceived of in corrections administration and by legislators as excessive. And so a law was passed not in the late 1990s called the Prison Litigation Reform Act, which sought to restrict the circumstances under which an inmate can actually file a lawsuit. And you should pay close attention to the four main parts of the Prison Litigation Reform Act, which is talked about in Part 4 in the first chapter on corrections administration. Finally, we also look at the organization and setup and functions of the community supervision and community parole functions of corrections, and talk about the independent model that is used more at the local level and the consolidated model in which sometimes parole and probation are managed together. In our state, they are separately managed and they are separate organizations, but in some states they are managed together. So there is some information that I think that you will want to look at regarding parole systems, and that's also in Chapter 10 in this week's module. The second chapter in this week's module, which is Chapter 11, attempts to review the roles and functions of the various positions within the prisons and within the corrections system. We go through pretty much from the top position down to the corrections officer position by talking about the roles and functions of wardens, who are the top leaders in the corrections institutions at the state level, and working their way down to mid-level management positions, captains, lieutenants, and very similar sergeants, very similar title structure, although the functions are different. A similar title structure to what is associated with law enforcement. But in addition to the more standard military type structure of corrections officers' titles all the way up through warden, we also have a variety of professional positions of people who work in corrections institutions. We have nurses. In some cases, we have doctors. In other cases, we have mental health and people and caseworkers. Different professions. We have librarians. We have a variety of staff functions such as food service, because these institutions are 24/7 enclosed organizations that have functions that don't exist in law enforcement. So those professions and job titles are unique to the correction setting. So take a look at that in the chapter, and also this chapter separates out the local county level jail corrections function headed by the sheriff, and talks about the deputy sheriffs who work in corrections and how their titles and structure may be different from those in the state correction system. Of course, in our state, corrections officers are corrections officers, whether they're working at the local government jail level or in the state facilities. But that is different across the nation, and it's carried out in different ways by different states and at the federal level. And a couple of other topics that are talked about in the section on roles and functions are the unique and different titles that exist in probation organizations and parole officers, and the different types of educational background and the different types of management styles that are common in probation and parole officer functions. Also, because of the nature of confinement and the possibility for inappropriate relationships occurring within confined settings, within jails and prisons, there is a discussion on the issue of corrections and as it relates to inappropriate relationships between inmates and correction staff. At the opposite end, there's also a discussion about the key characteristics that make up effective and good prison leadership, and you'll see a discussion on John DeLulio's ideas about what those key kinds of characteristics are that make for an effective leader in a corrections organization. So those are some of the issues and topics that you'll cover in this period. While this is a 2-chapter module, there still is only one discussion item and one assignment, which you will see for this module, and it will be described in your online material. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy taking on the subject of corrections administration in this unit, and I hope you enjoy the week ahead.